It's Thursday, 11 o'clock. It's time for this week's Watch Drop. The theme this week is the Explorer II from Rolex. It's so funny, I get asked about the Explorer I all the time. And it's one of those watches that is undeniably cool, regardless of whether you're going out and hiking and using it as a tour watch, or if you're going to be using it in an office place, it just works. But the Explorer II is one of those watches that started off life being a little bit confused, certainly misunderstood by the watch collecting community, but has now sort of found its feet. And this week, in the drop, we have an example of every single reference from its early days in the 70s all the way through to the current day, and even a Bamford modified Explorer II as well. So I'm really excited to sort of jump in, talk about the timeline in a sort of mini reference points kind of way, and explain to you what I like and which is my favourite. So let's get into it. The first watch I'm going to talk about is, of course, the 1655. This is where the Explorer II started, and it's a really interesting watch. Much like the Paul Newman Daytona, when it came out, people didn't like it, they couldn't sell it. And I guess the reason for that is that it doesn't look like anything else from Rolex. It's designed for people that go spelunking. I mean, I had to actually look up what that word meant. It's really, really interesting because now we look back at it and it's the most collectible of all of the Explorer IIs. Why didn't it get the reception that people wanted? Well, I suppose when you look at it, it doesn't look like anything else in the Rolex lineup. It has its own very unique design language. And even now that they've evolved it through many different generations, it still stands out as the one that looks completely different. Also, this watch is commonly referred to as having a GMT hand. Now, that's a complete falsehood. Later editions have a GMT hand, but the orange hand on this is used purely to tell the time in 24 hours. So it's a 24-hour, essentially a day-night indicator. If the orange hand is in the bottom half of the dial, then it's daytime. And if it's at the top of the dial, then it's in nighttime. And if you're out there, one of the very few people that actually use this for spelunking, and you're going on multiple hour cave expeditions or whatever these people do. I don't really understand what that is. I can see how this is a really useful complication, but for everyone else, it's just another hand on the dial. We can see by looking out the window if it's sunny or not. But now that time has passed and we're 50 years on almost from its origin, well, it kind of makes a sort of interesting quirk that collectors love. I certainly love, this example is particularly lovely. It's got a tritium dial and the hands and the dial have aged in that sort of custardy yellow way, which is just that lovely colour palette with the orange hand, the black dial. You've got extremely good legibility. I can really see why this watch is now looked at as a highly collectible reference. It's a great watch that I think was misunderstood when it first came out, but now we look at it and it's such a great thing. I miss that Rolex were that experimental. They certainly aren't these days, and all of the other generations of the Explorer II are slightly more reserved. But let's get into it and see how it aged through the years. The next watch is a watch that I wasn't aware of for a long time, and it's the reference 16550. So we've gone from a 4-digit reference to a 5-digit reference. Lots of people talk about this being a transitionary reference because, as we'll see later on, the case and the dial are very, very similar for the later reference 16570, which was around for such a long time. But this was only made for a couple of years. Now, the reason this is so collectible, apart from being only available for a couple of years, they used a dial that aged. It was originally white, and often these dials aged to this really, really creamy what's referred to as a Pana cotta dial. It is aesthetically beautiful, I have to say, and this example is spot on. Now, what they've done in this reference is get away from that interesting, I think, rectangular indices and the lume plots that were sort of peppered throughout the dial. This is pared back. It's much more simple. We've got round lume plots, which are of course tritium, but with white gold circles around them to identify them a little bit better and make it a little bit more elevated in terms of luxury, I think. But we've got silvered hands, which is later removed. And we'll go on to the next reference in a minute. You'll see exactly what I mean. But really what people love about this reference is the creamy Pana cotta dial and how rare it is. This dial is actually also what's called a rail dial. And again, this is something that's very misunderstood in the watch world, in the Rolex world. A lot of people misunderstand that rail term as being something to do with the outer track, but it's not. It's to do with, at the 6 o'clock position, the chronometer and the certified both have Cs that are completely in line with one another. It's a small quirk, and that's exactly what Rolex collectors love. But this watch is really lovely. I mean, I think I'm right in saying that even celebrities like Gordon Ramsay have one of these, and they're big Rolex guys. So you can see how collectible this thing really is. And it certainly commands a big premium over all of the other references. It's a really special watch. But let's move on. The next reference is the 16570. Now, this is a marginal change, a small evolution on the previous version that we were talking about. Still a 40mm case. So we've gone from it being 39 at the 1655 through to 40. Now, this case and reference was produced for a long time, over 10 years. And actually there are marginal evolutions within that reference itself. The two we've got here are called polar dials. They've got a brilliant white dial. And in the early generation of that reference, we had a tritium dial, so yellowish lume plots, which actually contrast really nicely against the bright white dial that's behind it. But we've gone from having silver hands to black hands for increased legibility. One of the things that this reference now does, you can now independently set the GMT hand. It's now absolutely a GMT hand, which enables you to have a different time zone on the dial in 24-hour revolutions. I like that because it means that no longer is this watch something that's really useful for people that go spelunking and not very many other people. But it now is a watch that actually has so many different uses for people to just take on holiday and have two different time zones. I really like that. But it can also, of course, still be used for telling you whether it's daytime or nighttime just by having the GMT hand in the right location according to the current time zone. The 40mm case size for me is a winning size. It just works. The lugs are actually quite short. You've got that classic 40mm case, which is common at this time to Submariners, GMTs, and it was just that sort of Goldilocks size that worked for pretty much everyone. It's not too big and not too small. And Rolex went on to change that. As this watch evolved, it moved on now to solid end links and a Superluminova dial. So the legibility is improved and the robustness of the bracelet is markedly different. No longer do you have that sort of vintage Rolex shaky, sort of rattly noise that you get with hollow end links. But you get something that feels like a tool watch that you could bash around and it would take a good beating. This is probably the reference that is most popular of all of them. But it's a modern feeling watch, but albeit in a 40mm size before Rolex started to blow the watch up into something that's really quite big. But let's move on to the next reference and see how things change, because there's really quite a big step change as we go up to the next reference. In the year 2011, so 14 years ago as of time of recording, Rolex introduced a really big difference in the Explorer II lineup. The case size was blown up from 40mm to 42. Doesn't sound like much, but on wrist, it feels much, much bigger. It actually feels much more heavy as well, more substantial. That's probably to do with the bracelet having another evolution up in terms of sort of safety clasps, and it's just an overall more robust and weighty thing. A lot of the design language from the original 1655 is used in this example. We've gone back to that really big oversized, now GMT hand, obviously day-night indicator on the original reference. But legibility was the key in this reference. You've got a really bright white dial, black hands, black surrounds to the indices, and that lovely orange pop of the GMT hand also mirrored with the Explorer II line in orange on the dial. It's a nice little addition, to be honest with you. This example here has got a 55-hour power reserve to it, and I really like that. That's the perfect amount of time for me. It means that you can take a watch, wear it all day, and it'll still be keeping brilliant time as you take it off overnight and beyond, more than 2 days. That's a great powerhouse of a caliber in this one, and I really like it. There's also quite a nice taper to the bracelet. It just feels, although the head of the watch is sizable, legibility is absolutely spot on. I think it's arguably a really great execution, and I like to see Rolex making substantial step changes in their design. But in 2021, Rolex made very marginal improvements to that reference and went to a 2.2 reference, 2.26570. And that's the current watch in the lineup. The bracelet is slightly wider at the lugs, it's 22mm now. The dial has, for him, slightly improved legibility, gone to a matte white instead of a slightly glossy white. The caliber is improved again, gives you 70 hours of power reserve. But actually you get the two side by side like we've got here. It's very difficult to spot which is the later reference. It's a very small change. One really fortunate position that we're in at the moment is that this week we also have a Bamford reimagined Explorer II. And I really love this because it's based on the II 16570. So that is the 42mm case, but not the very latest version. And what Bamford have done with this watch is reimagine it as a completely blacked out in PVD dial, bezel and bracelet, and the hands, rather than being black surround with an orange hand, are now a sort of creamy white with a black inside. I love that they've gone all the way back to the original 1655 dial. They've brought back the rectangular lume plots, and then they've hollowed out the primary 12 o'clock and the 6, 9 and 3. They've all even gone to the extent that the date disc is now black background with white text, so it's completely monochromatic. I think Bamford watches are really interesting, and I love the way that you've got someone or some people who really know watches, that love watches, that want to create modern evolutions that are closer to the original design aesthetic. And that's exactly what they've done with this reference here. I've actually just learned that Ozzy Osbourne wore something like this, an Explorer II from Bamford. I love that he's chosen something that's unique. You know, these are made in very small numbers. I would not be surprised if this was a piece unique. This is a really unique watch, clearly made by people that love watches and love watch heritage. And frankly, if it's good enough for the Prince of Darkness, then it's good enough for anyone. Great watch. So that's this week's drop. Another crazy drop hitting the site, and one watch that we didn't have when we did our ellipse dialed in video. It was the reference 5738P, a platinum oversized ellipse that I mistakenly thought that this was a bit too big, but wow, when you put it on wrist, it kind of works. It's a really cool execution of the ellipse. and lots of other watches that you should go, hit the website, check them out, and I'll see you next week.